The cold wind cut through the air like a blade as dust began to settle over Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The sun had dipped low behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot of a local pharmacy on 34th and Locust. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered above the entrance as Elijah Carter, a 15-year-old boy wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie, stepped outside and pulled his hood tighter around his face. His breath came out in faint clouds, the air biting at his cheeks. He moved quickly, his headphones in, his eyes down, trying to get home before dark. Inside the store, Mr. Dorsey, the store manager, kept one eye on a live feed of security cameras. He had noticed Elijah wandering through the aisles earlier, alone, moving from shelf to shelf, not speaking to anyone, looking over his shoulder every so often. Something about his body language made Dorsey uneasy. Maybe it was the way Elijah avoided eye contact. Maybe it was the hoodie. Or maybe it was just instinct. Or, as he told himself, experience. Either way, Dorsey didn't wait. He made the call. 2 minutes later, as Elijah stepped off the curb onto the sidewalk, a black and white patrol car pulled up beside him. The red and blue lights flashed briefly, though the siren stayed silent. A uniformed officer stepped out and called, "Hey, son, can we talk for a second?" Elijah paused, pulling one headphone out of his ear. "Me?" "Yes, you," the officer said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "You just came out of the store, correct?" Elijah nodded. "Yeah, I didn't take anything." The officer raised a hand. "Then this will be quick. We just need to take a look at what's in your pocket." Elijah froze. The cold seemed to vanish, replaced by a sudden heat under his skin. His hand went instinctively to his right pocket, with a small object pressed against his fingers. He knew what was there. He knew it wasn't stolen. And yet, something about the way the officer looked at him made his throat tighten. Around them, a few pedestrians slowed down. One woman took out her phone and began to film. "I didn't steal anything," Elijah repeated, his voice lower now. "Then you won't mind showing me," the officer said. Another man approached, Mr. Dorsey, slightly out of breath, his coat still open from rushing outside. "That's him," he said. "I saw him put something in his pocket." Elijah shook his head. "That's not true." "Then empty your pocket," Dorsey insisted, pointing. The air grew heavier. More phones came out. A couple walking past stopped to watch. Elijah's heart pounded in his ears. He could feel the weight of a dozen eyes on him. Some curious, some accusatory. No one asked him what he was doing. No one asked if he needed help. "I swear," Elijah said quietly, "I didn't take anything from the store." The officer took a step forward. "Son, please, we just need to clear this up." Elijah looked down. His fingers tightened around the object in his pocket. The thin cords, the rough plastic beads, the small metal charm. He had spent all week working on it. Each night after homework, threading and rethreading until his fingers ached. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it meant something. It was supposed to mean something. Still, he didn't move. "Sir," the officer said again, now more firmly, "empty your pocket." Elijah slowly reached inside. The silence was thick now. Even the cars seemed to have stopped in the street. He pulled out the object and held in his open palm, a hand-woven bracelet made of faded blue and white threads with 3 beads in the center, each one bearing a letter, M-O-M. For a second, no one said a word. "That's it," Dorsey finally asked, stepping closer. "That's what you were hiding." Elijah nodded. His lips parted, but he hesitated before speaking. When he finally did, his voice shook. "It's for my mom. Her birthday is tomorrow. I was going to buy some tape and a little keychain to finish the wrapping, but my card didn't work. I didn't take anything." Mr. Dorsey frowned, glancing at the officer, unsure now. The officer looked down at the bracelet again, then back up at Elijah's face. "Why didn't you just say that?" "I didn't know if you believed me." The crowd had grown. Phones stayed raised. Someone whispered, "It's just a bracelet." Another person said, "Why are they even bothering him?" But others muttered under their breath. Things like, "He looked guilty," or "He should have just done what they asked." The officer took a step back. "All right," he said slowly. I don't see anything illegal here. But next time, don't walk off if your card gets declined. People notice that kind of thing. I didn't walk off, Elijah said, almost too softly to hear. I just left. Mr. Dorsey didn't apologize. He just turned and walked back toward the store. The officer gave Elijah a quick nod and returned his patrol car. The lights flicked off. The crowd began to disperse. Elijah stood there alone for a few moments longer. The bracelet still lay in his palm, exposed now, not just the object itself, but everything it meant, everything it carried. He slipped it back into his pocket and turned away. The walk home felt longer than usual. The air was still cold, but now it cut deeper. Elijah didn't speak much that night. After unlocking the front door of the small duplex he shared with his mother, he moved quietly through the living room, dropped his backpack in the corner, and went straight to his room. The lights in the hallway flickered like they always did, but he didn't bother turning them off. He just shut his door behind him and sat on the edge of his bed, the bracelet still curled in his fist. It was warm from his touch, but it felt heavier than it ever had before, like it carried not just thread and beads, but judgment, misunderstanding, and a kind of shame he couldn't explain. He stared at the bracelet for a long time. He had made it with intention, piece by piece, over several evenings. He'd used a thin, worn-out string from an old hoodie, added the plastic beads he found in the clearance bin at a dollar store, and tied it together with a bent paper clip until he could find some tape to finish it. He had imagined his mother opening the little gift box he had planned to tape shut, imagined her smile. But now, that moment felt far away, almost unreachable. From the other side of the wall, he could hear the muffled sounds of the evening news playing in the living room, followed by the familiar rustling of grocery bags and the low hum of his mother's voice talking to herself as she unpacked. She wouldn't know what happened. Not yet. She had been at her second job all afternoon and wouldn't be home until after 7. Elijah didn't want to be the one to tell her. He didn't want her to look at him differently. He was afraid, not that she'd be mad, but that she'd be disappointed. And worse, he was afraid she'd understand too well. The next morning came too early. His sleep had been shallow, restless, filled with half-formed dreams where red and blue lights blurred into the faces of strangers. At breakfast, he barely touched his toast. His mother, wearing her hair tied back and already dressed in her nursing scrubs, sat across from him at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee. "You good?" she asked, her voice calm but probing. Elijah nodded, avoiding her gaze. "Yeah, just tired." She gave him a look, but didn't push. "You've got that science quiz today, right?" "Yeah," he mumbled again. "Do your best. That's all I ever ask." He nodded once more and grabbed his backpack. At school, things felt different, though no one said anything outright. He moved through the hallways with his head down, hyper-aware of every sideways glance, every whisper he couldn't quite hear. In third period, his friend Malcolm slid into the seat beside him and leaned in. "Hey," he said, "is it true? Someone said the cops stopped you yesterday outside the pharmacy." Elijah felt his throat go dry. "Yeah." Malcolm stared. "Why?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He didn't know the truth to everyone, but Malcolm had been his friend since 6th grade. "They thought I stole something." "Did you?" Elijah shot him a look. Malcolm held up his hands. "Just asking, man." "I didn't," Elijah said, quieter. "It was a bracelet. For my mom." Malcolm looked confused. "So, you didn't take anything?" "No." "Oh." Malcolm sat back, chewing on that. People were saying a bunch of stuff. That someone filmed it. Elijah stiffened. "Filmed it?" "Yeah, it's on social media. Like TikTok or something. You didn't see it?" "No." He hadn't checked his phone much since yesterday. Messages had started piling up, but he didn't have the energy to open them. He didn't want to see his own face on a stranger's feed, pause mid-sentence, eyes wide with fear. He didn't want to scroll through the comments. He made it through the rest of the day in a fog. When he got home, his phone buzzed again. This time, he opened it. One of the messages was from a classmate named Nia. She had screen recorded the video and sent it to him directly. "You okay?" Her text read beneath it. He tapped play. The footage was grainy and shaky, clearly filmed from someone standing across the sidewalk. It showed him standing beside the police officer, hands in his pockets. It showed Mr. Dorsey pointing at him. And then it showed the moment he pulled out the bracelet. The video cut off before anything else. There were already thousands of views. The comments were a war zone. Some people defended him. Others didn't. Some blamed the police. Others mocked his expression. A few simply posted laughing emojis and gifs of crying faces. He felt sick. That night, he sat on the floor of his room and stared at the bracelet again. It still looked the same, but now it meant something different. It had been a gift. Now it felt like evidence, proof of something more complicated than innocence. Later that week, a local news outlet picked up the story. It wasn't national news, not yet, but it reached enough people. A reporter requested the surveillance footage from the pharmacy. The store had hesitated at first, but after public pressure and a few angry calls from community members, they agreed to release it. The video from the store cameras showed Elijah inside. It showed him picking up a roll of tape and a keychain, then walking to the register. It showed him trying to use his card, once, twice, 3 times. Then it showed him setting the items down and walking out. At no point did he steal anything. The news report that followed was short and factual, but the comments it sparked were not. Some praised the video for clearing his name. Others questioned why it took so long to look at it. And some still insisted that something must have been off. At school, the atmosphere shifted again. Some students apologized. Others kept their distance, unsure how to act now. A few even congratulated him, like he had won something. He hadn't. All he wanted was to give his mom the bracelet in peace. But even that felt impossible now. By Monday morning, the story had fully escaped the boundaries of Elijah's neighborhood. What had begun as a shaky video shared on a student's TikTok had now reached local news broadcasts, several community discussion forums, and even a regional civil rights organization that reposted the footage on their official page with a caption that read, "Would this have happened if he didn't look the way he does?" With every share, every new comment, Elijah's world expanded and shrank at the same time. More people were talking about him, but fewer were speaking to him directly. When the school bell rang for homeroom, Elijah kept his head low as usual, but the hallway didn't echo with the same hostile mutterings as before. Now there was a thick silence in the air, charged and watchful. A few students who had once whispered or stared now looked away when he passed, unsure how to face the boy at the center of something so public. Others offered vague nods or the occasional awkward, "Hey," as if testing whether he would respond. But Elijah wasn't in the mood to perform forgiveness. Not yet. Not when the memory of being surrounded, accused, and dismissed played on loop behind his eyes. During lunch, he sat at the end of the cafeteria with his tray untouched. His appetite had been the first thing to go. Across the room, he spotted Mr. Jennings, his literature teacher, weaving between tables, clipboard in hand, as he tried to recruit volunteers for the upcoming humanities fair. The fair was usually a low-stakes event, some trifold boards about historical figures, maybe a diorama or two. But this year, the theme had shifted. Who are you beyond what they see? It was meant to tie in with units on identity, perception, and self-narrative. Elijah had rolled his eyes when the flyer was first handed out in class. Now, that phrase burned in his mind. He had just started to poke at the edges of his mashed potatoes when Mr. Jennings approached and sat across from him, uninvited but not unwelcome. "Elijah," he said gently, "how are you holding up?" Elijah shrugged, eyes still on the tray. "Fine." "Okay," Mr. Jennings said, neither pushing nor retreating. He gave a moment of quiet before continuing. "Listen, I know the last few days haven't been easy. And I also know that you didn't ask to be at the center of all this. But sometimes the voice that gets ignored the most is the one people need to hear." Elijah's eyes flicked up for a second, cautious. "We're doing something different this year," Jennings continued. "The humanities fair, it's not just posters and bullet points. We're asking for real stories. Student-led, student-told. I think you have something worth sharing." "I'm not a performer," Elijah said. "Good," Jennings replied. "We don't need performers. We need truth." The next day, Jennings handed him a composition notebook. No pressure. Just write. Doesn't matter if it's perfect. Doesn't even matter if it's about what happened. Just let yourself say what you haven't said yet. That night, Elijah sat in his room, the notebook unopened beside him for hours. His mother had finally seen the surveillance footage on a Facebook post a friend tagged her in. She came into his room just before bedtime, sat on the edge of his bed, and held the bracelet he had left on his desk. "I wish you had told me," she said softly. "I didn't want you to worry. I always worry. But more than that, I wish I could protect you from all this." He said nothing. She ran her fingers over the word MOM on the bracelet. "You know, I would have loved this no matter what it looked like. But now it means even more." He nodded, trying to keep his throat from closing. She looked him in the eyes. "Let them say whatever they want. You're not what they said you were." When she left, he finally picked up the notebook. He stared at the blank page for a while, then wrote 5 words. What they saw was wrong. That was all for the first night. But the next day, he wrote more, and more after that. The words came slowly at first, uneven and raw, but they carried weight. He wrote about being followed in stores, about clutching receipts like lifelines, about how the air had changed when he saw the red and blue lights, how it wasn't fear of being caught, but fear of not being believed. He wrote about his mother's hands, cracked and tired from work, and how he wanted to give her something beautiful. He wrote about the silence after the crowd walked away, and how loud that silence had been inside his head. By the end of the week, Elijah had filled half the notebook. Mr. Jennings checked in during class without drawing attention, slipping a note onto Elijah's desk that read, "If you're ready to share, I'm ready to listen." Meanwhile, the situation outside of school had begun to shift as well. The store where the incident occurred issued a short, formal apology, which many online users criticized for its lack of accountability. The statement read, "We regret the misunderstanding that occurred at one of our locations. We are reviewing internal protocols to ensure a better experience for all customers." It was hollow, Elijah thought, like someone trying to clean a wound without ever touching it. More powerful than the store's apology was a reaction of the community. Several local organizers hosted a youth-led forum that weekend about racial profiling, community trust, and accountability. Elijah was invited to attend, but he declined. He wasn't ready to speak in front of strangers. Not yet, but he was still writing. At school, whispers of his project began to circulate. Mr. Jennings, careful to never name Elijah directly, used anonymous excerpts during class discussions on bias and perception. One day, after reading a line about the fear of being wrongfully seen, a student in the back of the room said, "That could have been any of us." The room had gone still after that. In the following days, students began approaching Elijah, not with apologies, not with pity, but with questions. Real ones. What are you writing? How did you get through that? Did it change how you see people? He didn't always answer, but he listened, and something inside him shifted. For the first time, his silence felt like a choice, not a sentence. Then came the official announcement. The final presentations of the Humanities Fair will be performed live in front of peers, parents, and faculty in the auditorium. Elijah stared at the sign-up sheet for 2 days before writing his name in the last open slot. He didn't know exactly what he would read. Not yet, but he knew it would be his voice. And this time, no one else would speak over it. The auditorium smelled like old wood and nervous energy. A row of folding chairs had been set up in front of the stage, and laminated programs were stacked near the entrance, each one listing the names of students participating in the Humanities Fair and the titles of their projects. Elijah's name appeared on the very last page, just above the words, "Close and Reflection." He hadn't asked for that position. Mr. Jennings had said the schedule was randomized, but Elijah suspected there had been intention behind it. He didn't argue. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the footage from the pharmacy confirmed Elijah's innocence, and yet nothing about his day-to-day life felt restored. The initial storm had quieted online, the comments slowing, the reposts dwindling, the hashtags buried beneath newer controversies. But inside the walls of Roosevelt High School, the silence still lingered, dense, sharp, and difficult to name. Not everyone avoided him, but no one treated him the same. A few students maintained a polite distance, hesitant as though the attention he'd received had made him radioactive. Others interacted with a kind of guarded sympathy, careful not to mention anything that might trigger a reaction. They didn't realize that their silence stung just as much as their earlier accusations had. At home, his mother moved differently too. She tried to be gentle, but he could sense how she watched him more closely, how her questions came cloaked in caution. How was school? Now carried an undercurrent of, did anyone say something? And are you okay? Had turned into a routine, even when he offered the same tired, I'm fine. He appreciated her care, but he hated the way his pain had become something she had to carry with him. The bracelet now hung by a tack on his wall, still present, still unfinished. Then there were the moments in between, the quiet hours that made everything heavier. He had started avoiding mirrors, not out of shame, but because every time he saw himself, he thought of how others had seen him that day outside the store. A hoodie, headphones, a shape. Not a boy, not a son, not someone threading a bracelet with his mother's name on it. Just a potential threat. A maybe, a looks like. Despite the support from Mr. Jennings and a handful of students who had reached out with genuine kindness, Elijah couldn't shake the sense that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about being accused. It was about how quickly people had believed it, how easily his voice had been overwritten. And though the truth had come out, the weight of what had happened hadn't lifted. It had just changed form. He carried it in how he moved, how he responded, how he chose his words. The morning of the Humanities Fair arrived with a drizzle of cold rain. Elijah wore a black crewneck sweater and jeans. He left the hoodies at home now. He didn't want to admit why. At school, the gymnasium had been converted into a prep area for presenters. Students buzzed nervously over their display boards, rehearsing speeches and adjusting posters. Elijah kept himself, his notebook tucked under his arm. When Mr. Jennings found him, he gave a small nod, not asking for a preview, not requesting edits. Just a quiet, you ready? Elijah didn't answer. He just nodded back. The presentation order moved steadily. There were projects on immigration, cultural duality, gender identity, economic hardship. Students spoke of being underestimated, overlooked, or expected to follow paths that were never their choice. Elijah listened to them all. Some fumbled through their speeches, others delivered with theatrical flair, but each one carved out space for something real. Still, none of them looked directly at him. When his name was called, a hush fell over the room, not out of disrespect, but out of expectation. People had heard. Some had watched the video. Others had read the local coverage. A few had seen the surveillance footage that exonerated him. But this was the first time Elijah Carter would speak for himself. He stepped up to the podium slowly. He unfolded the notebook, but didn't look down at it. Not yet. My name is Elijah Carter, he began, his voice measured, steady. I'm 15 years old. I like building things with my hands, especially when they're for people I care about. My mom's birthday was last week. I made her a bracelet. It's not perfect, but it's mine. I made it with love. There was no reaction from the crowd. No fidgeting. No coughs. Just a silence that waited. A few days before her birthday, I was stopped outside a store, he continued. I didn't have money to buy the last few things I needed to wrap the gift. My card didn't work. So I left. I didn't steal anything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't run. But that didn't matter. I was still stopped, still accused, still surrounded. He paused, let the words breathe. I know what some people saw. A boy in a hoodie, alone, quiet, maybe suspicious, maybe guilty, maybe dangerous. But no one saw the bracelet. No one saw the hours I spent trying to make something beautiful. No one asked why I left the store empty-handed. They just decided what made sense to them. He turned a page in his notebook, but he still didn't look down. I've learned something since that day. It's not always about what you carry. Sometimes it's about what people think you carry. Their fears, their assumptions, their discomfort. He scanned the crowd. Teachers, classmates, parents, some of whom had looked away in the days after the video. Now their eyes were fixed on him. But I'm still here, he said. Still building. Still writing. Still carrying more than they can see. Then he reached into his pocket, and pulled out the bracelet. He held it up between his fingers. "This was never about this," he said. "It was about who people thought I was, and who they thought I couldn't be." He stepped away from the podium. There was no applause at first, just a silence, so full it felt like the air had shifted. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Then another. Then the sound grew unforced, uncoordinated, honest. His mother, sitting near the back, stood up, hands pressed to her heart, her eyes wet with pride. Elijah returned to his seat. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't need to. For the first time in weeks, the weight in his chest loosened. Not gone, not forgotten, but lighter. He had spoken, and the room had listened. The following Monday, something shifted at Roosevelt High. Not with fanfare, not with banners or grand gestures, but with something much quieter. A change in how people looked at Elijah, in how they spoke to him, in how the hallways no longer closed in on him with stares sharpened by assumption. For the first time since the incident, students began to treat him not as the boy who had been accused, but as the one who had stood up and spoken. That mattered more than he expected. It wasn't absolution, and it didn't undo the fear, the humiliation, or the unasked-for scrutiny. But it was a start. The day after the humanities fair, Mr. Jennings taped a printed quote to the outside of his classroom door. It read, "The weight of judgment is heavy, but the courage to speak your truth is heavier and stronger." It wasn't attributed to anyone. Elijah recognized the words. He had written them in his notebook, though he'd never read them aloud. Inside the classroom, a new energy lingered. Mr. Jennings had opened a section of the bulletin board titled The Pocket Project. Under it, he pinned slips of paper submitted by students anonymously, each one beginning with the phrase, "In my pocket I carry." Some were lighthearted. Others were painfully vulnerable. There were references to memories, grief, anxiety, names of lost siblings, drawings from younger cousins, ticket stubs from concerts that felt like a lifetime ago. Elijah's slip appeared among them a week later, folded in half, pinned low near the corner. It said only the bracelet, still unfinished. Meanwhile, the bracelet itself took on a new life. After his presentation, students began to ask about it, not mockingly, but with curiosity. "Can I see it?" they asked. "Did you make it all by hand? What kind of thread did you use?" Some even asked him for tips, explaining they wanted to make something similar for their own siblings or parents. Elijah, usually reserved, found himself answering. Slowly, then more comfortably. Something that had been a symbol of shame was now becoming a conversation starter. He still wasn't used to that. 2 weeks later, during a Monday morning advisory period, Principal Alvarez made an announcement over the intercom. Her voice was steady, but there was a noticeable shift in tone, less formal, more human. "In light of recent events," she said, "and in celebration of our students who continue to lead with honesty and integrity, Roosevelt High is launching a new peer-led initiative. It's called the Pocket Campaign." She explained the concept, an awareness program led by students, designed to combat stereotypes and confront bias, using personal storytelling, creative expression, and symbolic objects, what we carry, both seen and unseen. Elijah hadn't been told ahead of time that his humanities fair piece had inspired it. He sat there at his desk, stunned, as students turned to look at him, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet acknowledgement. After the announcement, Mr. Jennings stopped by his desk. "I hope you don't mind," he said, tapping the edge of Elijah's notebook. Some truths echo louder when others help carry them. Elijah said nothing at first. Then, "It's okay, as long as they listen." "They are," Jennings said. "They really are." The Pocket Campaign launched with surprising momentum. A small committee of students from different grades volunteered to lead it, and Elijah, despite his reservations, agreed to be part of the core group. He didn't want to be the face of it. He made that clear, but he was willing to contribute ideas, write content, and help other students craft their stories. The campaign set up a display in the school's front lobby, a glass case filled with symbolic objects contributed by students, each one accompanied by a short note. There was a cracked phone that belonged to a girl who wrote about her father's last text before he died, a bent spoon that a student said reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen, a paper crane folded during detention, representing the first time someone believed in him. And near the center of the case, resting on a square of dark fabric, was Elijah's bracelet. He hadn't intended to include it, but after watching so many others share pieces of themselves, he felt compelled. He wrote a simple card to place beside it. Not everything in your pocket is evidence. Sometimes it's a gift. One afternoon, while Elijah was helping rearrange the display, a younger student approached. 7th grade, maybe 8th. She hovered for a moment, then pointed at the bracelet. "That's yours, right?" Elijah nodded. "My brother told me what happened," she said. "He showed me the video. It made me mad. I used to get followed in stores, too. Like, even when I'm with my mom. I didn't know other people felt like that." He looked at her carefully. "A lot of people do. They just don't say out loud." She stared at the bracelet for a moment longer. "It's pretty," she said. "My mom would like something like that." Elijah paused, then crouched beside the glass case. "You want to learn how to make one?" The girl blinked. "Really?" "Yeah," he said. "I can show you during lunch one day." The campaign grew from there, not just within Roosevelt High, but in neighboring schools as well. Other teachers asked to replicate the model. Local community centers requested workshops. News outlets followed up, this time not to report on a viral video, but on how a group of students turned a moment of judgment into a sustained movement of reflection and conversation. Elijah never became entirely comfortable with the spotlight. He still preferred his space, his quiet, his notebook, but he no longer flinched at the sound of his own name. And the bracelet, once a source of anxiety, had become something entirely new. Reclaimed, reframed, redefined. It no longer belonged to a single memory, a single day, or a single moment of humiliation. It now represented resistance, resilience, and the right to be seen on your own terms. He finally finished it one night in March, weeks after the campaign had taken off. He found the right piece of thread, the right clasp. He tied it off with steady fingers, then held it up to the light. His mother was reading on the couch when he brought it to her. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked, smiling before she even touched it. "It's finished now," Elijah said. She took it gently, turning it in her hands. "It was never unfinished, baby. It was just waiting for the right time." She slid it onto her wrist and kissed his forehead. And for the first time in a long time, Elijah let himself smile. Not the guarded, half-curved kind he used to give when he wasn't sure how people would react, but a full smile rooted in something solid. It was never just about what was in his pocket. It was about what he carried with him and what he chose to leave behind.